Representative ZY entered the room, her expression calm but her heart racing with the gravity of the situation. The human delegate, River, stood up from behind his desk with a courteous smile. He had always been polite in their previous meetings, but ZY knew that beneath the surface, he was a shrewd and calculating man, not one to be underestimated. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" River asked, his voice cordial, as he gestured toward the chair opposite him. ZY inclined her head slightly in thanks before taking a seat. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Delegate River," she began, her tone measured yet tinged with urgency. "I'm afraid I've come with ill tidings, and I must request assistance from the human empire." River sat down, folding his hands on the desk in front of him. His eyes remained soft, but ZY could sense the keen intelligence behind them, already assessing the situation. "The Empire and the Farron people have long been allies," he said, his smile never wavering. "What can we do to assist?" ZY reached into her robes and withdrew a tablet, tapping it to project a holographic display between them. The screen lit up with images of destroyed ships, battle logs, and casualty reports. "This information comes from our expeditionary forces," she began, her voice steady but laden with the weight of the disaster. "Recently, we made contact with a new interstellar race, known as the Legion." River's smile faltered slightly at the mention of the new race, but he remained silent, his eyes now fully focused on the information before him. ZY continued, "We approached them with peaceful intentions, following all the protocols for first contact. However, the Legion did not respond in kind. They are a race of fungal sentients, and their numbers seem to be endless. They decimated our initial contact party before we could even open negotiations." She paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in, then resumed. "We sent a rescue fleet, believing that the first contact team had perhaps been caught in a natural disaster or succumbed to some sort of alien disease. But when the rescue fleet arrived, they were ambushed. The Legion ships, biological in nature, released clouds of spore-like mines that detonated on contact, tearing through the hulls of our vessels. It was a massacre." River's expression grew serious as he scrolled through the reports, his sharp gaze scanning the casualty numbers and battle damage assessments. ZY could see him processing the information quickly, his mind already turning over possible solutions. "Even after our rescue forces realized this was not a natural disaster but an attack, they were ill-prepared," ZY continued. "Our ships were outnumbered, outgunned, and overwhelmed. They had no choice but to retreat. And in their retreat, they led the Legion back to Farron space." At this, River's brows furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He simply gestured for her to continue. "The Legion followed them, and what followed was a nightmare. One by one, our planets fell. The Legion's forces are relentless. They don't just conquer, they consume. Every world they touch is overtaken by their fungal growth, the planet itself becoming an extension of their hive mind." River exhaled quietly, his face betraying none of his thoughts. ZY could tell that he was taking this seriously, but she also knew that River, like all human diplomats, was difficult to read. "The war has been devastating for us," ZY admitted. "We're fighting with everything we have, but it's not enough. Our forces are divided, our worlds are isolated, and we are losing ground every day. The Farron people are being torn apart." River set the tablet down and folded his hands again, his gaze now meeting hers. "Your people are divided and engaged in a losing war with the Legion," he summarized in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "I'm certain we can be of assistance. Humanity has encountered foes like this before. I'll have our commanders generate reports with suggestions for battle tactics and recommendations on how to proceed. Of course, we will assist in rebuilding once the conflict is over." ZY felt a pang of frustration at his response. It was a diplomatic answer, polite but insufficient. "Your offer is appreciated, Delegate River," she said, her voice firmer now. "But the Farron people need more than tactical advice. We need military support. Without it, we won't survive." For the first time, River's calm demeanor cracked slightly. His brow raised, and his eyes flickered with curiosity. "Are you asking for direct military intervention?" he asked. ZY nodded, her resolve hardening. "Yes. The Farron formally request that the human empire join us in fighting the Legion." River leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's a significant request, Representative ZY. The Empire would need to involve the Emperor and his advisors. I can't make that decision alone. I understand, ZY replied. But I must stress that the Farron cannot defeat the Legion without your help. Our intelligence suggests that the human empire has been concealing its true military strength for some time. Your capabilities far surpass what is publicly known. River's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. ZY pressed on, knowing this was her only chance. We believe the humans can win this war. And we need you to do so. River remained silent for a moment, then he slowly leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quieter tone. Off the record. ZY nodded, turning off her tablet and placing it in her pocket. River stood up and walked to the door, ensuring it was locked before returning to his seat. He powered down his own tablet and set it face down on the desk, then folded his hands in front of him. You're right, he said, his voice low. The human empire has indeed concealed much of its military strength. Could we defeat the Legion? Yes, we could. Of all the species we've encountered, they are perhaps the second or third most formidable. ZY blinked in surprise. Second or third? River nodded. Yes. The Federation is the most powerful. Their resources and coordination are unparalleled. Then there are the Gaussians, masters of electronic warfare. They have more ships than we have people, but they lack the military prowess to fully utilize them. After that, comes the Legion. He paused, leaning closer to ZY. The Legion is dangerous, but their strength lies in their numbers and their ability to reproduce quickly. If a war with them isn't resolved swiftly, it can become a quagmire, one that could drain us indefinitely. And right now, the Empire cannot afford another war. ZY's heart sank, but she knew she had to push further. So you won't help us? River shook his head slightly. We will provide support, but a full military commitment is off the table. The Empire has its own battles to fight. ZY sat in silence, realizing just how precarious her people's position had become. The Farron were on the brink, and the humans, despite their power, were not willing to intervene. The humans' eyebrows raised ever so slightly, a gesture that ZY had come to recognize during her interactions with their kind. It was an expression that often indicated a mix of confusion, curiosity, or perhaps even amusement. Humans, she had learned, were incredibly complex creatures, especially in social and diplomatic matters. It was sometimes hard to tell what lay beneath their often calm, even pleasant, exterior. Today, she could sense that beneath his formal demeanor, Delegate River was intrigued, though cautious. If you have a proposal, Representative ZY, River began, his voice polite but measured, I can bring it forward to the proper authorities. If it's within our power, we could grant it immediately. He paused for a moment, setting his tablet down and turning to face ZY more directly. His polite smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. This was no longer just a casual discussion. Whatever was coming next would clearly require deeper consideration. However, he continued, if you are asking for something more substantial, something far-reaching, it would need to be approved by the Emperor and his advisors. I can only promise so much. ZY nodded, though her heart sank slightly at the mention of the Emperor. She had long been familiar with the bureaucratic nature of the human empire's decision-making process. They were known to be shrewd negotiators. Typically, if they found a proposal favorable, they would respond within 2 human days, efficient by galactic standards. But if they were hesitant or lukewarm on an idea, their response could take far longer, often masked by vague statements like, the advisors are still discussing it, or a decision has not yet been made. And for proposals they outright disliked, rejection was swift and final. ZY knew this from personal experience. 3 years ago, she had proposed a joint research agreement between the Farron and the humans. The Farron were in desperate need of technological advances to match the rapid growth of neighboring civilizations. She had believed the humans, with their advanced knowledge and resources, would make ideal partners. However, the response had been immediate and unequivocal. The humans had no interest in sharing their cutting-edge technologies, especially not with another galactic nation that could one day become a competitor. That proposal had been dismissed before it could even reach higher levels of authority. This time, however, was different. This time, the stakes were far higher. ZY knew her current proposal would likely face the same fate, outright rejection. But the Farron people had armed her with a bargaining tool, one that might just shift the balance in her favor. The Farron could not afford to take no for an answer this time, and neither could she. River watched her intently, his calculating eyes giving little away, but ZY could feel the tension building. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment she had to turn the tide. "We believe the humans would be potent allies in this fight," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Our military intelligence has gathered reports on your forces, and we know that what we've seen is only a fraction of your true strength." The human said nothing, his expression unreadable as he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. His fingers steepled before his mouth, creating a barrier between them. His gaze, however, never left ZY's. There was something predatory in his posture now, something almost dangerous. But still, he remained silent, letting her speak. "Our reports indicate," ZY continued, "that more effort has been spent by the human empire concealing your military might than any other galactic nation has spent using it. The human fleets we've seen, your ships, your weapons, are not the full extent of your power. The Farron request your aid in defeating the Legion, and we ask that you bring your full military strength to bear. The Legion is not a force we can defeat alone. They have ravaged our worlds, divided our people, and if we do not stop them now, they will consume us completely." River's intense gaze remained locked on hers, but when he spoke, his voice was as calm and measured as ever. "We cannot fulfill that request at this time," he said flatly. ZY's heart skipped a beat. It was the response she had feared. But she was not ready to give up. "We know humans can fight," she pressed, her voice rising slightly as the bioluminescent glow in her skin began to intensify, betraying the passion and urgency she was trying to contain. Her speech remained calm, but her body language spoke volumes. "Are you not capable of defeating the Legion? Are you afraid of them?" River remained unruffled, his demeanor unchanged. "That is not the issue, Representative ZY," he replied, his tone even. "Tell me honestly, could human warships defeat the Legion in combat?" He glanced down at ZY's tablet, still displaying the grim reports of Farron losses, before bringing his gaze back to hers. His question lingered in the air, carrying more weight than the words alone could convey. ZY hesitated for a moment, sensing that River was leading her into a more delicate part of the conversation. She chose her next words carefully. "We believe your forces could," she replied, keeping her voice firm but respectful. "The Legion's numbers are vast, but they are not invincible. We've seen them defeated in smaller skirmishes when caught off guard. But our forces are too spread out, too weakened by the losses we've already suffered. The Farron cannot hold the line alone." River nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then, in a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, he stood up and moved to the door of the room. He glanced outside, ensuring no one was listening, before shutting the door firmly and locking it. ZY watched, surprised by this sudden shift in his behavior. When he returned to his seat, his face was more serious than she had ever seen before. "Off the record," he said quietly, his voice now a low murmur. ZY immediately powered off her tablet and tucked it away, understanding that this conversation had just moved into a far more sensitive realm. "Your military intelligence is correct," River began, his eyes now fixed intently on hers. "The human empire has concealed much of its military might. Could we defeat the Legion? Yes, we could. They are perhaps the second or third most formidable race we've encountered." ZY blinked in surprise. "Second or third?" she repeated, her voice betraying her shock. "Yes," River confirmed, leaning back in his chair. "The Legion is dangerous, but their strength lies in their numbers and their ability to reproduce quickly. In a prolonged conflict, they could become nearly impossible to defeat. But in terms of raw military power, there are others who rank higher. The Federation, for example, and the Gaussians with their unparalleled electronic warfare capabilities. And then there are races you haven't even encountered yet." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But the question isn't whether we can defeat the Legion. The question is whether we're willing to commit the resources necessary to do so. And right now, the Empire is fighting on other fronts. We cannot afford to be drawn into another prolonged war, especially one with no clear end in sight." ZY sat in stunned silence as the weight of his words settled over her. The humans could defeat the Legion, but they weren't willing to intervene. "Off the record," the human delegate said, his voice dropping to a low murmur that was both conspiratorial and guarded. ZY, catching the tone, immediately powered off her tablet and stowed it safely in her pocket. She knew that what would follow would not be part of any official record. It was a private revelation, one that she needed to hear but would not be able to cite later. The stakes had shifted. The human delegate, River, rose from behind his desk, moving with a quiet, deliberate grace. He stepped around the wooden barrier that separated them and walked to the door. ZY's sharp eyes followed his movements as he cracked the door open just enough to peer outside. He glanced up and down the hallway, his eyes scanning for any eavesdroppers. Once satisfied that they were alone, he carefully closed the door and locked it with a soft click. The sound seemed louder in the heavy silence that followed. River returned to his desk, and as he sat back down, he opened a drawer and pulled out a tablet. Without a word, he powered it off and placed it face down on the desk. This simple, calculated gesture told ZY everything she needed to know. They were about to discuss something significant, something classified beyond even the usual levels of diplomatic conversation. His eyes met hers, and the intensity in his gaze unsettled her. There was no longer the veneer of polite diplomacy that had marked their previous interactions. What she saw now was something more predatory, more dangerous. He was not merely a diplomat at this moment. He was a strategist, a representative of an empire that clearly possessed far more power than it let on. "Your military intelligence is correct," River began, his tone flat, unembellished. "Humans have concealed the full extent of our military capabilities from other galactic nations. Could we defeat the Legion? Yes. Of all the spacefaring races we've encountered, the Legion ranks perhaps as the second or third most formidable, not counting ourselves, of course." ZY could feel her pulse quicken. She had expected the humans to be capable, certainly, but this kind of admission still shocked her. "Second or third," she stammered, her bioluminescent skin flickering as she processed this unexpected information. Her mind raced through the implications of his words. If the Legion, with their terrifying reproductive capabilities and overwhelming numbers, were only second or third on the list, what did that say about the true strength of the human empire? River nodded slowly. "Yes, second or third. The most formidable, naturally, is the Federation," he continued, his expression remaining steady. "They've been top contenders for military dominance in this galaxy for centuries. Their strategy, technology, and discipline are unmatched, though they tend to keep to themselves." ZY listened intently as he continued. "Then there are the Gaussians," River said, leaning back in his chair. "They're not what most would consider a typical military power. Their strength lies in their electronic warfare capabilities. It's their one real trick, but it's an incredibly effective one. They can shut down fleets, disrupt communications, and sabotage even the most sophisticated systems with frightening ease. It's remarkable, really. Most of the galactic community sees them as a friendly, benign race, but their potential for warfare is something few have truly understood." ZY blinked, processing the information. The Gaussians. The peaceful, diplomatic Gaussians? It was hard to imagine them as military giants, but she had to admit that electronic warfare was a powerful tool. Once they had used their electronic sabotage, however, River explained, they were beatable by traditional means. Simple weaponry and basic tactics could take them down once their electronic tricks were exhausted. "And then there's the Legion," River continued, his tone becoming more contemplative. "The Legion is formidable in their own right, but their strength lies in their vast numbers and their ability to reproduce rapidly. Their biological ships, their spores, and their soldiers, they're all designed to overwhelm through sheer force of numbers. A single legionnaire, given enough time, could multiply into an entire army. That's what makes them so dangerous in a prolonged conflict. They're like a plague. If you don't stamp them out quickly, they'll overrun everything." ZY shuddered at the description. She had seen firsthand the devastation the Legion could cause. Their numbers were unending, their tactics relentless. They had torn through the Farron defenses, reducing whole planets to barren, overgrown wastelands, consumed by the Legion's fungal growths. The Farron had tried to fight, but every attempt to hold a defensive line ended in brutal losses. The Legion was a force of nature, consuming everything in its path. River leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk and steepling his fingers in front of his face. His eyes narrowed as he looked at ZY. "This is why I must deny your request for military assistance," he said, his voice calm but firm. ZY's heart sank. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing it confirmed was a devastating blow. The Farron were divided, their forces halved, and the Legion was slowly consuming them. Without help, they would fall. You're denying us? ZY asked, her voice betraying her disbelief. Even though you know we're fighting a losing war? River nodded slowly. Yes. As I said, the Legion is formidable, but they aren't invincible. We could defeat them, but it would require resources. Resources that the human empire cannot spare right now. ZY felt a surge of frustration. But why? If you have the strength to stop them, why would you stand by and let them destroy us? River regarded her for a long moment before answering. Because the human empire is already stretched thin. We're engaged on other fronts. Other threats require our full attention. A war with the Legion would be costly, and we cannot afford to divide our focus. ZY stared at him, trying to comprehend the logic. The humans had the power to help, but they were choosing not to. It wasn't because they were afraid of the Legion, as she had initially suspected. It was because the humans, in their cold, calculated way, were weighing their priorities. And right now, the Farron and their war with the Legion didn't make the cut. River leaned back again, his eyes never leaving ZY's. The Legion is a threat, yes, he said quietly, but we have to think strategically. If we commit to this war, we risk weakening ourselves on other fronts. And a prolonged war with the Legion could quickly turn into a stalemate. They can resupply faster than anyone else. Their biological ships grow like weeds. And any war that drags on could easily become a quagmire, one that we can't afford to get stuck in. ZY sat in silence for a moment, processing his words. River had laid it out clearly. The human empire wasn't unwilling to fight. They simply weren't willing to fight a war that they saw as unwinnable in the long term. The Legion, with its overwhelming numbers and ability to regenerate, represented a conflict that could spiral out of control. For the humans, this wasn't about whether they could win, it was about how much they were willing to sacrifice to do so. And as for the second or third most formidable race in the galaxy, River added, his tone softening just slightly, there's another race you haven't encountered yet. The WAG. They remind us of ourselves, in some ways. They're new to the galactic scene, having only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. But they're aggressive, warlike. We don't know their full strength yet, but they're not to be taken lightly. ZY was stunned into silence once more. The humans were acknowledging the Legion's threat, but they were framing it as a matter of time and resources, not of indestructibility. The war was one they could fight, but not one they were willing to fight now. And that, more than anything, left her with a sinking feeling of helplessness. ZY could scarcely believe what she was hearing. The Legion, a race that had decimated the Farron people and carved a path of destruction across their territories, was not even considered the most significant threat by the humans. Instead, they viewed a newly emerging race, the WAG, as potentially more formidable. A race that hadn't even officially joined the galactic community was seen as more dangerous than the unstoppable tide of the Legion. I can see you're still processing this, River said calmly, watching her with sharp, analytical eyes. He sat back in his chair, fingers drumming thoughtfully on the desk. So let me reiterate our previous offer. We can have the Empire's top military analysts review your positions and provide you with detailed strategies for combat against the Legion. They'll also share findings from our own skirmishes with the Legion, which should drastically improve Farron combat effectiveness. This is a very generous offer. ZY clenched her fists at her sides. This offer, while undoubtedly valuable, fell far short of what she had come to secure. Advice and analysis would not turn the tide of war. The Farron people needed boots on the ground, ships in the sky, and weapons in their hands. What of human warships? ZY asked, her voice calm but insistent. Could we at least receive a few vessels on loan? Or perhaps we could hire human mercenaries? River shook his head slowly, his expression unchanged. I'm afraid not. The human empire doesn't engage in such practices. We do not loan out our ships, nor do we hire out mercenaries. ZY's patience was wearing thin. What about weapons training? She pressed. Even a blueprint or basic military training for our soldiers. No, River interrupted flatly, cutting off her suggestion before it could fully form. That's out of the question. ZY's breath caught in her throat, but she wasn't ready to give up. She stood, slowly rising to her full height, her bioluminescent skin shimmering with hues of deep blue and purple. The soft, iridescent light filled the room, casting an otherworldly glow over the human delegate's face. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. There was one last card to play, a card she had been hesitant to use, but one that the Farron Prix had insisted was her last resort. ZY's voice was steady, but firm, as she spoke. The Prix calls in his favor. River froze. For a moment, the atmosphere in the room seemed to thicken, growing almost suffocating. He blinked, his normally composed face betraying a flash of something. Shock, perhaps? Or was it disbelief? He leaned forward, staring at her as if trying to decipher her words. The Prix calls in his favor, ZY repeated, her voice louder now, more authoritative. Her skin pulsed with light, her posture unyielding. There was no going back from this. River's expression darkened, his tone dropping into a warning. You don't know what you're asking, he said slowly, the words deliberate, as though he was weighing each one carefully. This is Pandora's box, and you don't just want the key, you want a sledgehammer to break it open. ZY met his gaze, unflinching. I've read your human mythology, River. I know about Pandora's box. Do you know what was inside? Monsters of every kind imaginable. But there was one other thing inside. Hope. She took a breath, then added resolutely, we need hope, Delegate River. This is the only chance my people have. River's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the air between them was electric. ZY could feel her pulse hammering in her chest as the silence stretched on, each second more agonizing than the last. She had played the most powerful card in her hand, the promise of a favor owed by the human emperor himself. And now, all she could do was wait for River's response. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost pained. These reports don't tell the full story, do they? He said, glancing down at the tablet before him. Your forces are fractured beyond repair. Your colonies are starving. Your ships and stations, destroyed or left derelict. Even your homeworld is on the brink, fighting an unending battle just to slow the Legion's advance. Not stop it. Not turn the tide. Just slow it. ZY's heart ached at his words. He had captured the grim reality of the Farron struggle with brutal accuracy. Yes, she whispered. Without human military intervention, the Farron race is finished. River leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as he stared up at the ceiling. We know humans can fight, ZY said softly, gathering her resolve. We've seen it. You are capable of defeating the Legion. Are you really going to let my people die when you have the power to help? There was a long pause. River's gaze seemed to drift beyond her, staring into the distance as if lost in thought, or perhaps haunted by memories. When he finally spoke again, his voice was somber, almost regretful. The human emperor, he began slowly, was once rescued from drowning by the Farron prince during a visit to your aquatic colony. I assume you know this, since you're invoking the favor. ZY nodded, remaining silent. This was the critical moment. The emperor vowed to repay that debt when your people called upon it, River continued, his voice quiet but measured. And now, you are calling in that favor. But I don't think you fully understand the magnitude of what you're asking. He looked at her then, his gaze steady but grave. If humans go to war with anyone, it's not a small affair. We don't engage in conflicts halfway. You're asking us to commit fully to this, to fight a war that we didn't start and one that, frankly, we have no reason to involve ourselves in beyond a promise made years ago. This isn't just about deploying ships or soldiers. This is about opening Pandora's box. ZY's bioluminescence dimmed slightly as she took in the weight of his words. But there was no turning back now. She had come this far, and the Farron people had no other choice. She straightened her posture, her resolve hardening. Without your help, my people will die. All of them. The Farron are a proud race, Delegate River, but we are not too proud to beg. Please, help us. For a long, excruciating moment, River said nothing. His eyes were distant again, as if seeing something beyond the walls of the room. Then, finally, he spoke, though his voice was little more than a murmur. The Emperor will have to approve this, he said, almost to himself. But if he does, the war will not be easy. For either of us. With that, River stood, his expression unreadable as he moved to unlock the door. The meeting was over, and ZY knew that her fate, and the fate of the entire Farron race, now rested on the decision of the human Emperor. ZY returned to her quarters, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had secured the military assistance of the human empire, But River's warnings echoed in her ears. This was no ordinary war, and the humans did not fight half-heartedly. If they committed to this, it would be a battle the likes of which neither the Farron nor the Legion had ever seen. As ZY sat at her desk preparing her final report to the Farron Prix, the weight of the situation began to settle over her fully. What had started as a desperate plea for help had evolved into something far more significant. The fate of the Farron people would be determined in the coming battles, yes, but there was more at stake. This war with the Legion had the potential to reshape the balance of power across the galaxy, perhaps permanently. The Farron people, once proud of their independence and resilience, were now depending on the intervention of the human empire to survive. ZY paused, reflecting on the irony. The Farron had always prided themselves on their ability to stand alone. But this crisis had forced her, and the entire Farron civilization, to confront a truth that had long been ignored. Independence was an illusion. In a galaxy filled with so many different civilizations, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, the future belonged to those who forged strong alliances. And while this was a bitter lesson for the Farron to learn, ZY knew it would also change them for the better. They were learning the importance of cooperation and the interdependence of all galactic civilizations. The first wave of human warships arrived in Farron space within mere days of the call for assistance. Massive and imposing, the human vessels were unlike anything ZY had ever seen before. Their sleek, angular design stood in stark contrast to the more organic, flowing forms of Farron ships, which mimicked the natural curves of oceanic life on their homeworld. Human ships, by contrast, were machines of war, designed for efficiency and destruction. And the Legion, accustomed to overwhelming its enemies through sheer numbers and the biological resilience of its ships, had no idea what was about to hit them. The humans wasted no time setting up strategic defenses around Farron planets that were still holding out. Their efficiency was almost frightening, but it was exactly what the Farron needed. In those early days of the Alliance, ZY was granted access to the human command center, where she saw firsthand how they operated. Every decision, every maneuver was calculated with precision. There was no wasted effort, no hesitation. And despite the overwhelming pressure they faced, the humans displayed a calm confidence that filled ZY with hope. At the center of this formidable force stood Admiral Jonathan Kane, the commander of the human fleet. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a reputation for brilliance and ruthlessness in battle. ZY had heard of him long before the humans arrived, and now, standing before him in the command center, she could see why he was so highly regarded. There was a quiet intensity to him, a sharpness in his eyes that betrayed a mind always thinking several steps ahead. "Representative ZY," Admiral Kane said, greeting her with a firm handshake and a confident smile, "we're here to help. We'll hit the Legion hard and fast, and we won't stop until they're driven out of Farron space." ZY nodded, her voice steady but laden with emotion as she replied, "Thank you, Admiral. The Farron people are in your debt." Kane gave a curt nod in response and turned back to his officers. "Prepare to engage the enemy," he ordered, his voice crisp and authoritative. "Let's show the Legion what happens when they threaten our allies." The first engagements between the combined Farron human fleet and the Legion were fierce. The Legion had grown overconfident, accustomed to facing weakened Farron forces, but they were utterly unprepared for the raw firepower and advanced tactics the humans brought to the table. Human warships and Farron vessels fought side by side, combining their strengths in ways that complemented each other perfectly. The humans, with their superior weaponry and ship designs, provided overwhelming firepower, while the Farron ships, nimble and agile, carried out swift, surgical strikes. It quickly became apparent that the Legion was faltering. Their biological ships, once thought invincible due to their rapid regeneration and adaptability, were torn apart by the humans' advanced weaponry. The biological mines and spores that the Legion had relied on to disable ships were rendered ineffective by the humans' sophisticated countermeasures. Despite the intensity of the battles, Admiral Kane remained calm and composed throughout, directing his fleet with the precision of a seasoned chess master. He was always one step ahead of the Legion, anticipating their moves and countering them before they could become a threat. ZY found herself deeply impressed by Admiral Kane's leadership. His officers worked with the same quiet efficiency that defined their commander, and there was an air of unshakable confidence aboard the human command ships. Even in the thick of battle, Kane never raised his voice, never showed a hint of doubt. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and desperation that had marked the Farron forces in the early days of the war. Now, with the human fleet fighting beside them, the Farron had found new hope. As the days turned into weeks, the tide of the war began to shift. Slowly but surely, the combined Farron-human alliance pushed the Legion back, reclaiming lost territories and rescuing besieged colonies. It was hard-fought every step of the way. The Legion did not surrender easily, and their numbers seemed endless. But with every victory, the Farron forces regained their strength and morale. They were no longer the fractured, desperate force they had been before. Now, united with their human allies, they had a real chance to turn the tide of the war. The climax came in the form of a daring assault on one of the Legion's major strongholds. It was a battle that would define the war, a battle that would either solidify the Farron-human alliance's victory or doom them to defeat. Admiral Kane, true to his reputation, devised a bold strategy that involved using a decoy fleet to draw the Legion's forces out of position, leaving their stronghold vulnerable to a direct strike. The plan was risky, but if it worked, it would cripple the Legion's operations in Farron space. The fighting was brutal. Human and Farron ships alike took heavy losses as they engaged the Legion head-on. Biological spores and mines filled the air, detonating across the hulls of ships, but the combined forces pressed on. Admiral Kane, as always, remained calm and focused, issuing orders with the same steady hand he had shown since the beginning. ZY, watching from the command center, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The Farron people had fought alongside the galaxy's most formidable race, and they were holding their own. When the dust finally settled, the stronghold had fallen. The combined fleets had emerged victorious, though at great cost. The Legion, now fractured and disorganized, retreated from Farron space, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and devastation. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Farron people had hope. As ZY prepared to send her final report to the Pre, she couldn't help but reflect on what had been gained, and what had been lost. The war with the Legion had not only determined the fate of her people, but had reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. The Farron had learned the importance of alliances, and the humans had proven themselves as allies beyond compare. Together, they had forged a new future, one built on cooperation and mutual respect. But ZY knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The Allies ultimately triumphed. The destruction of the Legion's stronghold dealt a devastating blow to their operations in Farron space. With their forces in disarray, their supply lines severed, and their leadership unable to regroup, the once mighty Legion began to retreat. The human and Farron alliance, sensing their advantage, pressed forward relentlessly, ensuring that the Legion would not be able to mount another offensive. What had once seemed like an insurmountable enemy was now on the run, and the tides of war had finally turned. After months of brutal, relentless fighting, the war was over. The Legion, unable to withstand the combined might of human technology and Farron resilience, had been driven out of Farron space. The relief that washed over the Farron people was palpable, but it was tempered by the heavy cost of victory. Entire colonies had been lost, fleets destroyed, and thousands of lives had been sacrificed to achieve this hard-won peace. Yet, as the stars above their homeworld shone down once again, free from the shadow of the Legion, the Farron people could finally breathe freely. They had survived. ZY, who had played a central role in securing the human intervention that had made this victory possible, stood on the bridge of a human warship, gazing out at the endless expanse of space. The aftermath of war always brought mixed emotions, relief, sorrow, and a quiet satisfaction that the fight had been worth it. Beside her, Admiral Jonathan Kane joined her, his expression reflecting the same feelings. His face showed the wear of battle, but in his eyes was a deep sense of accomplishment, though tempered by the weight of the losses they had endured. "We did it," ZY said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She could hardly believe it herself. The war was over, and her people were safe. "We did," Admiral Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars as well. "But now, the real work begins. We rebuild, together." Those words carried profound meaning. The battle for survival may have ended, but the rebuilding of an entire civilization would take years, if not decades. The Farron people had been fractured by the war, their worlds devastated, and their infrastructure in ruins. Yet, thanks to the humans, they had a chance to rise again from the ashes of the conflict. And in doing so, a bond had been formed between two very different civilizations, one that would reshape not only their future but the future of the galaxy itself. In the days and months that followed, the work of reconstruction began in earnest. Human engineers and Farron scientists worked side by side, rebuilding cities, restoring power grids, and setting up new systems of defense. But it wasn't just the material world that was being rebuilt. The alliance between the Farron and the humans was deepening, as cultural exchanges and shared projects fostered mutual respect and understanding. What had begun as a military partnership evolved into something far more lasting and meaningful. ZY, who had once walked into a meeting with human delegate River carrying only the hope of her people's survival, now found herself as a key figure in forging this new era of cooperation. She spent countless hours in diplomatic meetings, ensuring that the ties between the Farron and humans were strengthened, not only through military pacts but through trade agreements, educational initiatives, and cultural programs. The Farron people had much to learn from humans, and likewise, the humans were enriched by the wisdom and traditions of the Farron. In time, the scars of the war began to fade. Cities were rebuilt, and new life filled the once devastated colonies. The Farron people, who had once teetered on the edge of annihilation, found themselves stronger than ever, bolstered by human technological advancements and their own renewed sense of purpose. The alliance had brought them not just survival but a future that was brighter than they had dared hope for. Years later, as ZY looked back on those tumultuous times, she did so with a deep sense of pride. The battles had been fierce, and the losses heavy, but they had overcome. She had helped secure the future of her people, and in doing so, had played a role in shaping the destiny of the entire galaxy. The lessons learned from the war with the Legion would not be forgotten. ZY's mind often drifted back to the pivotal moment when she had invoked the ancient debt of the Pre to the human empire. She had expected the humans to respond, but she hadn't known just how much their intervention would change the course of history. The humans had not only brought military aid, but they had also brought something far more valuable: hope. In their willingness to stand beside the Farron, even when it wasn't their war to fight, the humans had shown that they were more than just allies of convenience. They were friends, partners, and equals in the struggle for survival. The galaxy had indeed changed, just as River had warned it would. The balance of power had shifted, but not in the way anyone had expected. The Legion, once a looming existential threat, had been defeated, not by overwhelming force, but by the unity of different species working together for a common goal. It was a lesson that would resonate throughout the galaxy for years to come. ZY, now a senior diplomat within the Farron government, was more convinced than ever that the future lay in cooperation. The alliance between the Farron and the humans had grown stronger over the years, and it had expanded to include other races who had seen the benefits of working together. What had once been a war of survival had become the foundation for a new era of peace and prosperity. The Farron and humans, along with their new allies, continued to work together to ensure that the threat of the Legion, and any others like them, would never rise again. Yet, ZY knew that the galaxy would never be without conflict. New challenges would arise, and there would always be those who sought to disrupt the fragile peace that had been established. But the war with the Legion had shown that strength did not lie in military might alone. It lay in unity, in the bonds forged between civilizations, and in the shared determination to protect what was good and just. The scars of the war would always remain, etched into the memories of those who had lived through it. But those scars, ZY knew, were also a reminder of what they had fought for. They were symbols of the resilience, strength, and hope that could be found in unity. The galaxy had changed, but it had changed for the better. And ZY, like so many others, was ready to face whatever the future might bring, together.